force Ukraine to comply with all the demands of dictator Putin, reintegrate Russia into the global economy, and create a new world alliance that will include Russia if Europe refuses to allow dictator Putin back into the G7. Europe and Ukraine are shocked today by Donald Trump's latest proposal. The administration of the United States president has handed over a series of confidential documents to its European colleagues, each one page long, outlining its vision for the reconstruction of Ukraine and the reintegration of Russia into the global economy. The proposed measures sparked a fierce struggle at the negotiating table between America and its traditional allies in Europe. The outcome could fundamentally change the economic map of the continent. Because in this statement, Trump says that the United States will unite into a single global economic alliance together with Russia, India, and China. And on December 13, there will be a meeting of American, European, and Ukrainian negotiators to discuss Trump's latest proposal. At the same time, Trump's team admitted that the current version of the peace plan does not require Russia to withdraw any troops from Donbass, only Ukraine. My name is Alexei Pichi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, leave a like, write any detailed comment under this episode, and subscribe to my Telegram channel, Peachy News. The link to it is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, Donald Trump's administration handed over a package of documents to the Europeans, based on which the United States is aiming for a sharp rapprochement with Russia and a break with Ukraine and Europe. Moreover, just to give you an idea of the scale of the problem, Politico writes that the United States is considering the idea of creating an alternative to the G7 with Russia's participation if Europe is opposed. The Trump administration is discussing a strategic initiative to create a new international formation, the so-called Key Five. According to the concept, this group should include the United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan. It is assumed that this alliance could compete with the current club of leading industrialized countries, the G7 from which Russia was excluded in 2014. So Trump's team is saying, let's create a new alliance together with the unwashed Russians to compete with the Europeans. And regarding this, Trump sent additional messages to the Europeans. The United States plan is outlined in the appendices to the current peace proposals, which are not public. As of December 13, it is already known that the Europeans, Ukrainians, and Americans are supposed to hold a meeting to discuss this initiative. And here it is. The documents detail the plans of American financial companies and other enterprises to use about $200 billion of frozen Russian assets for projects in Ukraine, including the construction of a large new data center that will be powered by the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is currently occupied by Russian troops. But that's not even the most shocking proposal that the Wall Street Journal is writing about today. A general United States plan has been presented to pull the Russian economy out of crisis, which includes investments by American companies in strategic sectors, from the extraction of rare earth elements to drilling oil wells in the Arctic, as well as facilitating the restoration of Russian energy flows, that is, oil and gas, to Western Europe and the rest of the world. Some European officials who reviewed the documents said they're unsure if some United States proposals should be taken seriously. And one official compared them to President Trump's vision of building Riviera-style resorts in the Gaza Strip. Another, speaking about the proposed United States-Russian energy deal, said this is the economic version of the 1945 conference where the winners of World War II essentially divided up Europe. It is known that on the eve, December 10, after a phone conversation, Trump discussed the peace process with French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. But as early as Wednesday, Trump told reporters that he was considering the possibility of attending a meeting in Europe this weekend. And these proposals from Trump sound just unbelievably wild. Europe, which since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 has been trying, on the contrary, to give up Russian gas. Well, in order to deprive the Kremlin of military reserves and reduce its own dependence on a strategic rival, well, it's unlikely to voluntarily want to return to buying Russian energy resources. But that's not all. European officials want to use those same frozen Russian funds held in European institutions to provide a loan to Ukraine. And this is even more shocking. The clash at the negotiating table now concerns not only the issue of territory in Ukraine, but increasingly business as well. And, paradoxically, it puts Russia and the United States in one alliance and sets this alliance against Ukraine and Europe. And now, the German government is trying in every possible way to explain that European sanctions prohibit any work or financing of operations related to the repair or reuse of the Nord Stream gas pipeline. But Trump insists that this kind of business should be revived. And in general, he doesn't care that these wild Russians have started the largest war of the 21st century. European officials fear that the United States approach will give Russia the necessary respite to accelerate economic growth and strengthen its military position. And right now it really looks like Trump is, rushing to save the dictator Putin. The fact is, a new assessment by a Western intelligence agency says that Russia has technically been in a recession for the past 6 months, and that the problems of managing the military economy while simultaneously controlling prices pose a systemic risk to its banking sector. So right now is exactly the time to increase pressure on Russia, because its so-called reserves and capacities are completely depleted. The past 6 months have seen a steady recession. But Trump chose a different path and says, no, let's save Russia, we'll invest money there and save the economy. But it seems that Americans are only interested in money right now. If the American point of view prevails, it will undermine Europe's own plans to support the Ukrainian wartime government and further strengthen Russia's economic isolation. American officials involved in the negotiations say that the European approach will quickly deplete the frozen funds, claiming that these frozen Russian assets will be spent too quickly. Washington, on the other hand, will bring in Wall Street executives and billionaires from private investment funds to invest this Russian money and expand the amount of funds available for investment. And one of the American officials said that under United States management, this fund could grow to $800 billion. But here we can immediately add that it might not grow either. But there are signs that the American approach may unfortunately prevail. The fact is that on Wednesday, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that he had held productive talks with the chief executive officer of the investment company BlackRock, Larry Fink. It is with him that Trump is negotiating on the issue of rebuilding Ukraine and returning Russia to the global economy. I talked about this yesterday. And now the United States negotiation group considers joint economic activity and energy interdependence as the cornerstone of its philosophy. Business in exchange for peace. For example, Ukrainian data centers, which are planned to be built someday in Ukraine, will receive electricity from the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is occupied by Russia. But Trump suggests putting the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant under United States control, and hearing news like that is just really sad. The current transatlantic debates are essentially turning nearly half a century of United States and European policy toward Moscow upside down. Just take a look. United States presidents from Ronald Reagan to, by the way, Donald Trump during his first presidential term pressured their European allies to give up Russian gas and oil. Now the same Trump is calling to do the exact opposite, to buy Russian gas and oil again. But Europe, on the contrary, has followed a policy called change through trade all these previous years. The belief was that economic ties between the West and Moscow would keep the Kremlin from going to war and even help export democracy to Russia. Trump, in his second term, is making a similar bet, with the difference that the Trump administration does not expect Russia to become a democratic state. In other words, the roles of the United States and Europe have simply reversed, and the current accelerating schedule of shuttle diplomacy and summits in recent weeks indicates that the discussion is rapidly approaching its conclusion. It is known that Steve Witkoff, Trump's envoy on Russia, and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, are consulting with leading Wall Street executives to determine how to rebuild Ukraine's devastated economy. Ukraine's chief negotiator, Rostem Umerov, regularly visits Steve Witkoff's luxurious estate in Miami Today, European leaders held a phone conversation with that very same Witkoff, and over the weekend they will meet in Paris, and on Monday they will gather again separately in Berlin. Last week, Witkoff and Kushner spent several hours with Russian President Vladimir Putin, arguing that Russia needs to show its willingness to end the war through diplomatic means, before it can take advantage of the lifting of sanctions and the investments that a peace agreement could bring. Finally, I'll briefly address the topic that's being discussed most loudly, since it's such a behind-the-scenes issue. So the Financial Times writes that the current draft of Trump's peace plan does not require Russia to withdraw its troops from Donbass, only Ukraine. A demilitarized buffer zone is proposed in northern Donetsk, requiring withdrawal of Ukrainian forces. Zelensky sees this as a temporary pause in the war, while the Americans urge Ukraine to accept the so-called territory exchange, which they view as inevitable. And all this has been covered up by claims of caring about peace. Well, in reality, Trump already has business deals lined up, and an unyielding Ukraine is simply getting in their way. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss any new episodes. Friends, if you found this episode interesting and believe my work is important, you can support this YouTube channel financially with any donation or paid subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video, it clearly says support Alexei Peachy's channel. Choose any format that is convenient for you. I will be grateful for any support you provide. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.